Hey everyone, it's Kenji, and we're going to make some sauerkraut and sausage soup. This is a Polish dish, Kapusniak, though I'm sure it's eaten in other parts of the world too, and I apologize if I just mislabeled it as purely Polish. That's the way I know it. Actually, I know this dish from a dish my mom used to make when I was little, which she just called hot dog and cabbage soup, which is essentially exactly what it sounds like: hot dogs and cabbage and some carrot and potato all boiled in broth. And I actually really loved that soup, but I found out only later in life that it was based on Kapusniak, which is this Polish dish. So I'm going to start with some bacon here. I don't know, a couple ounces of bacon. Just a little bit of oil to get that going. And we're going to use, instead of using the cabbage that my mom used, we're going to be using some sauerkraut, some naturally fermented sauerkraut that I had going outside. Alright, so in a pan, high heat, we're just going to let that start to render and brown a little bit. I'm going to take this kielbasa, which is a smoked Polish style kielbasa. Actually, I'm going to cut it into half because I want the pieces to be a little more bite size. Okay, but still pretty chunky like that. About the size that'll fit on a spoon. If you don't have kielbasa, you can use a hot dog, you can use andouille, you can use basically whatever smoked sausage you like. This is a very adaptable and easy recipe. Not too many ingredients in it at all. And of course, you know, if you have like a local butcher who makes good sausages, European butcher who makes like kielbasa, great. If not, the supermarket stuff is just fine to use. Nothing wrong with it. Actually, I'm making a much bigger batch than I expected, so I'm gonna go over and pull out the bigger pan. Go with this guy. Leave him over there. Okay, so while that's rendering out, I'm going to get our remaining ingredients together. So we got a carrot. Carrot is pretty classic. You could also do a combination of carrot and parsnip, or carrot and rutabaga. Any kind of a root vegetable will work. This one also I'm going to cut into what size pieces? Let's say quarters lengthwise. Whenever I cut carrots lengthwise like that, if I'm going to cut into quarters or halves, I cut it in half and then I flip half of it around. That way when you push it together, you end up with a basic rectangle instead of this kind of wedge like that. It just makes it much easier to get everything a nice, makes it easier to cut. Alright, so chunky little bits of carrot too. Okay. I got an onion here. So I'm going to take the ends off here. We're cutting this, slicing this thinly pole to pole. So I'm going to take the ends off, peel it, then we're going to go this way. Not too thin, not too thick. I don't know, maybe is that thin by some standards? I'd say about 1/8 of an inch. Okay. Alright, let's transfer this all now. Alright, so I already got a little bit of brown stuff in there, so I'm going to throw this onion and carrot in there. You should be all doing this all in one pot. The only reason I'm throwing the onion and carrot in here right now is because I got a little bit of browning on the edge of that pan, and I don't want to waste that. Let's get this camera on. I don't want to waste that browning, so I'm going to get the onion and carrot in there, and a little bit of the liquid that comes out of the onion and carrot. We're going to use that to essentially deglaze this pan. meaning we're going to dissolve those brown bits. Got a little splash of chicken stock to help it along. We're going to dissolve those brown bits to get all that flavor. Make sure we pick up all that flavor in there. But yeah, like I said, you should be doing this. You don't need to do 2 separate pans like I just did. I just only switched out pans because I realized my first pan was going to be too small. All right. Okay, so basically we're looking for this bacon and sausage to render out, which it has, mostly. Just start browning a teeny tiny bit around the edges, which it also has. So I think we're essentially now good to add all of our remaining ingredients. So that's going to be here. Onions and carrots, we're going to let those cook for just a couple minutes until they're softened but not browned. Oftentimes I'll say you should cook onions until they're softened but not browned. And people ask me, well, why don't you brown the onions? Well, the answer is that when you brown onions, the complex carbohydrates in there and the larger sugars will break down into smaller sugars, you know, like fructose, glucose. So those will break down into smaller sugars, which are actually sweeter. So the constituent parts of a large, you know, polysaccharide are generally sweeter than the sugar itself. So the more you cook onions and the more you break down those larger sugars into smaller ones, the sweeter the onion gets. And so, you know, sweetness is fine if that's what you're going for, but oftentimes I don't really want my soup or whatever to be super sweet, you know, unless it's something like a really heavily caramelized French onion soup, and then I do want it sweet. But you know, it's up to you whether how much you want to brown your onions. Just know that, you know, the more you brown your onions, the sweeter they're going to get. All right, we're looking good there. So now what we're adding is the sauerkraut. This is a sauerkraut fermentation container. I use it to make all kinds of pickles from a company called Crazy Korean Cooking. The website is called Crazy Korean Cooking. They're great because they, you know, you put your vegetables in. So this is a head of cabbage that all we did was salt it, 3% salt. All the liquid is naturally from the cabbage. There's no added liquid, nothing. Just 3% salt by weight to the shredded cabbage. We pack it in here, and then once you get it in there, there's this inner lid that you can push down, and it has a gasket, so it keeps everything submerged. And then there's this smaller lid on top that you can push down and really get all the extra air out. And then finally you seal it off like that. And your cabbage stays completely submerged. It's a really good, easy way to make sauerkraut. I did this one, it was fermenting for about a month, a little over a month, outdoors. So I'm in Seattle, so outdoors was around between, say, 40 and 50 degrees, generally 40, 55 degrees, while I was fermenting this. I will link to a written recipe for this that I have, which calls for a combination of fresh cabbage and sauerkraut. I'm doing just sauerkraut today. All right, so we're gonna get the sauerkraut in there. I'm gonna go with maybe, I don't know, a couple cups of sauerkraut. Of course you can use store-bought sauerkraut. You don't have to ferment your own sauerkraut for this. That looks good to me. Get the rest of this packed down again. And once the sauerkraut is fermented, then you can store it in the fridge. Ferment it to the level that you want it, that is. Okay, there's sauerkraut in. Oh, looking good. I'm going to top this off with some chicken stock. This is homemade chicken stock, but you can use store-bought. And you can make this as soupy or as thick and stew-like as you want. I'm going somewhere in between the soup and the stew. And finally, I'm going to add a potato. You don't have to peel it. I'm peeling it because I don't know, I feel like it. I think that's what my mom used to do. And a russet potato or a yellow potato or a white potato, any of those will work. So for this potato, let's go this way. Now, the potato, generally a potato, once you start boiling, it'll take pieces like that would in water would take maybe 5 minutes to soften up. But if you do it in the pH of the water actually has a big effect on how rapidly potatoes and other vegetables soften. So this liquid is actually going to be quite sour because of that sauerkraut, so a relatively low pH. And the lower the pH, the longer it takes to soften vegetables, and that's just because pectin, the carbohydrate glue that kind of holds the potato cells together, doesn't soften as fast at lower pHs. So once this comes to a boil, it's probably going to take at least 10, maybe 15 minutes for those potatoes to actually soften up. And then there's a couple things left to do, but I will basically just let this come to a boil. And then I will come back when the potatoes are fully cooked. So I'll be back in about 5 seconds because I forgot to add the bay leaves. Here's some bay leaves. They're going in there too. All right. All right. Now I'll be back in 15 minutes-ish. All right. So everything is done. The potatoes are just tender but kind of not falling apart, which is where I want them. So I'm going to leave that on a very low simmer. The last thing I want to do here is I'm going to take the spices. So a lot of the recipes for this will call for a bunch of spices, particularly caraway is common. Caraway, paprika, white pepper. I'm going with just some white pepper and some paprika. And the way I'm adding this, so I like my soup actually to be a little bit thick, just slightly thickened. So I'm doing what a lot of like Chinese soup recipes do, which is where you add a little bit of cornstarch just to thicken it up. So that's about, I don't know, a half teaspoon each of, quarter teaspoon of white pepper, half teaspoon of paprika, or maybe a teaspoon, a couple teaspoons of cornstarch. And I'm going to make like a little slurry, basically. Stir it all together. And then just pour this straight into the simmering soup. And that will add flavor. It will thicken it up ever so slightly. And by the way, you might notice I didn't add any salt to this. That's because the bacon and the sausage and the sauerkraut are all pretty salty. So there's no real, you shouldn't really add salt to this, especially if you're using store-bought stock, which is almost always already salted unless you specifically buy the no sodium kind. But don't add any salt until the end because you don't want to accidentally oversalt. You can always add more salt, but you can't take any away. So I can use a little bit more. And that's it. Now you can finish this with herbs, parsley, dill. My daughter is currently going through a anti-dill and parsley phase, so I'm going to keep the dill separate on the side. I'll just sprinkle it per plate. But I'm going to plate up a bowl of this and show you what we got. Look at that. So again, you can make this as hearty or as soupy as you like. Mine is somewhere between, so like a very, very chunky soup. All right, finish it with a little sprinkle of dill on top and around. Yeah, I'll get you a sausage here. That'll be the dog sausage. I'm also gonna just drizzle a little bit of olive oil around here because I like it. And set that aside for the dogs. There we go. Kapusniak, aka hot dog and cabbage soup. This is the kind of meal I imagine Charlie Bucket eats when he, you know, if you found 25 bucks in the street and could afford a lot of bacon, this is the kind of thing. Don't they eat like cabbage water in that movie or in that book? I don't remember, but yeah, really good. All right, guys. All right, guys, gals, non-binary pals, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.